Most people see an antique, a masterpiece of 19th century craft. But in the folklore of Kentucky, this is a coffin for the living. 17 names, 17 funerals. It's known as the conjured chest, a piece of furniture so feared it was allegedly surrendered to a museum just to stop the dying. But the most chilling part isn't the legend. It's the evidence that sits in the top drawer to this very day. Small, gray owl feathers, the remnants of a desperate ritual performed nearly a century ago to break a cycle of blood. The story begins in 1830. An enslaved master craftsman named Remus was reportedly murdered by his owner, Jeremiah Graham. Driven by a thirst for justice, Remus's community conjured the wood, sealing a curse inside with dried owl blood. The rule was absolute. If your clothes touch this mahogany, you are fitting yourself for a casket. The first victim was Graham's own son, but the Remus Debt was just getting started. You'll hear about Virginia Cleveland and her maid Sally, the two women who finally faced the darkness to save their family. They used these very owl feathers in a counter-conjure, begging for a mercy that had been denied for 100 years. Is the curse truly broken, or is the chest simply waiting for the next person to open the drawer? To find the truth, we have to go back to the beginning, to Meade County, 1830, a world where the law favored the master, but the wood favored the craftsman. Remus was a master. He poured his life into this mahogany. He didn't know it would become his executioner. We will explore the rage of Jeremiah Graham, the man who thought he could own a soul, only to find that the soul has a way of fighting back. We will reveal the details of the conjuring, the forbidden ritual of honey and dried owl blood, and we will trace the 17 alleged victims, from the first child to the freak accidents that defined a century. Why did the Winchells, the Ryans, and the Gregorys all share the same terrifying fate? Was it a statistical impossibility? Or was the chest truly hunting the bloodline of the man who killed Remus? We'll examine the 20th century tragedies that finally forced the family to seek Sally's help. And we will ask the most important question. If the names are scrubbed from the official archives, does that make the story less real? Or does it mean the history was so dark they had to hide the records to protect the living? Dim the lights. Lock your doors. This is a journey into the heart of a Southern Gothic nightmare. Whatever you do, stay away from the mahogany. Our journey begins at the Graham plantation, a place where justice was a luxury for the rich and a weapon for the dead. The year was 1830, and the wood was thirsty. We look first at the man who thought he was in control, and the man who proved him wrong. The conjured chest, 17 graves, 1 bloodline, no mercy. The nursery was ready, the clothes were folded, and the debt was about to be called. To understand the curse, we have to understand the world that built it. Meade County, Kentucky, 1830, a land of rigid hierarchies and absolute power. Jeremiah Graham was a man of status. He was building a legacy, and he wanted his home to reflect his dominance. His wife was expecting their firstborn son. For Graham, this child was the future of the family name. He needed a nursery chest, something grand, something that would last for generations. He turned to Remus, an enslaved man whose hands possessed a skill that Graham could never buy with money alone. Remus was a master craftsman. He treated wood like a living thing, listening to the grain, honoring the material. For weeks, the sound of the chisel was the only heartbeat in that shop. Remus poured his soul into the mahogany. When it was finished, it was a masterpiece. The grain flowed like dark water. The crystal knobs caught the light like diamonds. But when Jeremiah Graham entered the shop to inspect the work, the atmosphere didn't fill with praise. It filled with dread. Folklore says Graham was looking for an excuse to exert power. He claimed the work was inferior, a slap in the face to his status. He accused Remus of insolence, and then he chose violence. The beating was systematic. Remus was left on the floor of the shop he had honored with his talent. He never saw the masterpiece in the nursery. Remus died from his injuries shortly after. Jeremiah Graham had his chest, but he had also created a vacuum that needed to be filled with justice. The community of enslaved people on the plantation didn't have a court of law. They had the old ways. They gathered the ingredients for a conjure: dried owl blood, honey, and a focused, collective intent. Legend says they moved like shadows into the house, coating the inner corners of the drawers with the mixture, a hidden seal of vengeance, a promise that the wood would remember the blood spilled in the shop. The curse was set. If your clothes touch this wood, your heart will stop beating. Jeremiah Graham, arrogant and untouchable, moved the chest into the nursery. He placed the hand-stitched clothing of his firstborn son into the top drawer, the very drawer where the conjure was strongest. Within weeks, the nursery went from a place of hope to a place of silence. The child died. No explanation, no warning. The first name on the ledger was the one Graham loved most. He had his heirloom, but the price was his legacy. Most people would have burned the wood, but Graham was stubborn. He refused to believe a conjure could touch him. He kept the chest, and as the years passed, the Remus Debt kept waiting. By the 1850s, the chest was passed to a nephew, a vibrant young man who saw it as a family treasure. He moved his suits into the drawers. He prepared for a life of wealth. He didn't live to see his 22nd birthday. He became the second victim of the curse. The news began to spread. The cursed chest was no longer a plantation secret. It was a local terror. The family tried to move it to a guest house. They tried to hide it. Next was a young cousin. She thought the stories were just superstitions. She died of a sudden fever shortly after moving her Sunday dresses into the mahogany. 3 deaths, 1 bloodline. The pattern was now a documented tragedy. Remus's justice was being delivered, 1 generation at a time. We move now into the late 19th century, the era of the Winchells. Amanda Winchell was a skeptic. She believed the deaths were just bad luck. She moved the chest to her estate. She thought the conjure had worn thin with age. She was wrong. Her husband was the next to fall. Victim number 4. The ledger was growing. The community began to avoid the Winchell home. The estate was sold, but the chest stayed. It was the one item no one wanted to buy. By the turn of the century, the death toll reached 6, each one a descendant of Jeremiah Graham. The new century brought new victims. The Gregory family, a railroad worker, used the chest for his uniforms. He died in a freak accident at the rail yard. This was the 7th death. The family was now living in a state of constant fear. Victim number 8, a young woman who was simply cleaning the chest. Physicians looked for poison. They found only mahogany. By the time the 1930s arrived, the death count hit double digits. They remembered the owl blood. They remembered the honey. It was hidden away for years, covered in tarps, but it was only waiting for the Clevelands. By the 1940s, the world was at war. But for the Clevelands, a different kind of darkness was allegedly gathering in their guest room. Virginia Cleveland had inherited the mahogany chest. It was a family heirloom, but to her, the stories of a curse felt like remnants of a superstitious past. She had a young son. Like those before her, she believed a piece of wood couldn't possibly harbor a soul. She placed her son's clothing inside. It was a simple act of a mother that supposedly invited a century of rage back into the house. The legend says that within months, the nursery went silent. Another descendant was gone. Victim number 15. This was the breaking point. Virginia didn't just feel grief. She felt the presence of a man who had been dead for over 100 years. She turned to the only person who took the conjure seriously, her maid, Sally. Sally reportedly understood the old ways. She knew that Remus wasn't a monster. He was a craftsman who had never been given justice. The story goes that the 2 women sat in that room for 3 nights. Just 2 women and a blood debt that refused to be settled. Sally told Virginia that to stop the dying, they had to offer Remus what he was denied in 1830. They began a counter-conjure. They didn't use blood this time. They used feathers, the messengers of the night. They spoke his name, Remus. They acknowledged the murder. They apologized for a century of silence. As they placed the feathers in the top drawer, the air in the room reportedly shifted, turning from freezing cold to a heavy, unnatural warmth. Sally gave a final haunting instruction. Never move these feathers. They are the seal. They are his peace. After that, no further deaths were reported. For 30 years, the mahogany sat silent. The debt, it seemed, was finally settled. But the weight of the history was too much for the survivors to live with. In 1976, it is said the family contacted local archives. They didn't want money. They wanted the chest gone, forever. They supposedly warned the staff, keep the drawers empty, and whatever you do not touch the feathers. Some claim that if you visit a museum in Frankfort today, you can still see them, gray, dusty, and undisturbed for nearly 80 years. While many treat it as folk history, some staff members have claimed to feel a heaviness near the exhibit. A sense that even in a house of history, the craftsman is still watching over his work. Remus finally has his masterpiece on display. Not in a plantation nursery, but in a place where his story is told. 16 lives were allegedly claimed by this mahogany predator, but the 17th name was the one that mattered most, the craftsman who refused to be forgotten. Some believe records connected to the family were never fully made public, leaving the true scale of the tragedy in the shadows. Today, the conjured chest remains one of the most unsettling pieces of folklore in Kentucky history. Sally's ritual was the only thing that worked in 140 years. It reminds us that some wounds don't heal with time. They only heal with justice. 16 names, one debt, one survivor. The archives are closed, but the story stays open. Remember, some belongings are better left lost. We are left with a mahogany chest and a trail of 16 graves. But is it truly the wood that is cursed, or is it the memory of what happened in that 1830s workshop that refuses to stay buried? Some skeptics argue that the Remus Debt is a case of mass suggestion, that once a family believes an object is lethal, every tragedy is blamed on the grain of the wood. They look for lead paint, they look for toxic molds, they look for anything that can be measured with a microscope. But science hasn't found an answer for why the deaths reportedly stopped the moment Sally placed those feathers in the drawer. Some believe the ritual wasn't about magic. It was about justice. It was the first time the Graham family admitted the truth. Some believe records connected to the family were never fully made public, to protect the living from the weight of the past. Today, the chest sits in a museum vault in Frankfort. It is treated as one of the most unsettling pieces of folklore in Kentucky history. Some staff have claimed to feel a heaviness in the air when they are alone with the artifact, a sense that the drawers shouldn't be opened. They say the feathers haven't moved in 80 years, not by a draft, not by a vibration. They remain as a seal of peace. If you believe the legend, Remus isn't just a ghost. He is a guardian of his own masterpiece. The conjured chest is not alone. Throughout history, objects created in moments of extreme pain have carried a dark resonance. But Remus's story is different. It isn't a story of a monster. It's a story of a man reclaiming his dignity from the man who took his life. Every line in this wood is a testament to his skill, and every death was a reminder that his life had value. We live in a world of mass-produced items, objects with no history, no soul, no weight. We are left with a question that history cannot answer. If the cycle was broken in the 1940s, why does the fear remain? If you saw this chest in an attic, if you saw the crystal knobs and the dark flowing grain, would you bring it home? Or would you hear the owl in the distance and walk away? The debt is supposedly paid, but the mahogany remains. Beyond the ghosts and the legends, there is a name that history almost let slip through the cracks. Remus was not just a victim, he was a creator. A man whose hands could turn rough timber into something eternal. In a time when he was told he owned nothing, not even his own life, he built something so powerful that no one could ignore it. He poured his dignity into the mahogany. He carved his soul into the joints. We tell this story not just to be afraid, but to remember him. The Remus Debt may have been a warning to the Grahams, but today, the chest stands as his monument, a masterpiece that outlived the man who tried to claim it. The work remains, the name remains. May the craftsman finally find his rest.